Okay, let's dive in. The big buzz on X, April 28th, 2025. It was all about Trump's economic agenda, wasn't it?
Absolutely. Deregulation, those tax cuts and tariffs and, what it all meant globally, that was the conversation.
Right. And we're going to look at this through a really interesting lens today. Stephanie Kelton's book, The Deficit Myth.
The one Elon Musk recommended, yeah.
Yeah.
Using modern monetary theory or MMT
Yeah.
to sort of understand it all in that 2025 context.
Exactly. So our mission really is to get our heads around MMT's main points from the book and see how that framework helps us make sense of Trump's policies back then.
Well, the core of the deficit myth, it's pretty challenging to traditional thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Kelton argues that governments like the U.S., ones that control their own currency, they aren't really constrained by deficits in the way we usually think.
So not like a household budget then.
Not at all. The real constraint, according to MMT, is inflation. Can the economy handle more spending without prices getting out of control? That's the key question.
Interesting. So that whole idea that deficits automatically burden, future generations, MMT pushes back on that.
It really does. It suggests that a government can spend what's necessary for, say, big goals like full employment or massive infrastructure projects.
As long as it doesn't trigger too much inflation.
Precisely. And Kelton really explores how you could potentially fund major investments in jobs, healthcare, that sort of thing.
Okay, so let's apply that to Trump's 2025 agenda. How would MMT view something like his tax cuts? Would they expect a big GDP boost?
Well, from an MMT standpoint, not necessarily. Tax cuts don't automatically create growth, especially if the economy is already doing pretty well. The resources are already being used.
Ah, okay.
What MMT would flag as a major concern with those policies are the tariffs.
Right, because tariffs often mean higher prices for imported goods, which hits consumers directly.
Exactly. And that feeds right into MMT's focus on inflation being the real limiting factor. We saw people on X at the time talking about costs going up.
Yeah, I remember seeing some of that chatter.
So while maybe some specific sectors, like big oil companies, might have benefited from deregulation, ordinary households could feel the squeeze from those rising costs.
And MMT would suggest the government could potentially step in, use spending to offset some of that.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
Strategic spending to counter negative impacts. Yeah. But it's tricky.
Because you also had the whole disruption to global trade from the tariffs, worries about exports in 2025. It sounds complicated.
Oh, it's definitely complex. And we have to remember, MMT isn't, the standard view. That hypothetical stat you mentioned, maybe only 30% of economists backing it in 2025.
Right.
It just highlights that this is still very much a debated theory within economics.
Okay, let's pivot slightly to Elon Musk. Why would someone like him, known for, shaking things up, recommend the deficit myth?
I think it really taps into that same spirit,
Yeah.
right? Questioning the conventional wisdom. MMT offers a fundamentally different way to look at economic possibilities.
Challenging assumptions.
Exactly. And it might resonate with how he approaches innovation in his own fields.
Yeah.
He did tweet about MMT back in 2020, so it wasn't entirely out of the blue.
And wasn't there a connection being drawn at the time between, say, Tesla's growth, they had that $25,000 vehicle coming out, and Trump's deregulation push? I think Forbes mentioned it.
Yeah, there were definitely those discussions happening. People on X were linking successes like Musk's to the broader policy environment.
So it makes his interest in a framework like MMT, well, pretty relevant to the whole 2025 economic conversation.
It definitely folds into the larger picture, yes.
So really that whole intense debate on X back in April 2025 about Trump's policies, it taps into these bigger ongoing global arguments about how economies should work.
Absolutely. And for you listening, trying to track societal trends and cultural shifts, understanding these different economic viewpoints like MMT gives you a richer context for interpreting that period.
So I guess the key takeaway here is that MMT offers this really different perspective on government spending, focusing on inflation, not deficits, as the main limit. And that has huge implications for how you might evaluate the economic policies everyone was debating so fiercely in 2025.
Which leaves us with a thought for you to consider. Thinking about MMT's principles, but also about those real-world reports of rising costs back in 2025. What do you think are the most crucial things to weigh up when deciding if an economic policy is actually effective and, fair?